which consists of VISTA members that serve across all WVU campuses, led by Chelsea Franklin, State and National Service Coordinator, Eric Murphy, Assistant Director for the Center for Service and Learning, and the rest of our team here at the Center for Service and Learning. As we progress through the program today, we would like you to gather your thoughts and your questions and put them in the chat feature. Now, I'd like to introduce VISTA Joan Simonetti, who will be our program moderator today.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am VISTA Joan, and I'm a member of our West Virginia VISTA Collaborative, but I serve off-site as the Community Engagement Coordinator for WVU Extension and also Brooke County Economic Development Authority. In this capacity, I work in a diverse community with a broad range of cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds, supporting entrepreneurship, community, as well as workforce development. We hope that today's program will make an important contribution to our community in honor of Martin Luther King and motivate behavioral and social changes now and in the future. Dr. King said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Our AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps Seniors program engages over 275,000 Americans nationally. We are focused on results-driven service and learning, and our AmeriCorps initiatives are broad-based in scope. We work with students to help them graduate, combat hunger and homelessness, help seniors live independently, respond to natural disasters, fight the opioid epidemic, support veterans and military families, help communities impacted by COVID, and so much more. Today, we celebrate and recognize Martin Luther King Jr. for his legacy of service, sacrifice, commitment, and faith. His courageous action challenges the norms. His actions then still help us challenge the norms today. Even though it's been over 50 years since his passing, his profile and courage continues as a beacon of light for those of us who wish to see. By example, Dr. King showed us the importance of how to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, to deal with unarmed truth, to remain optimistic in the face of adversity, and to realize that real change requires reaching in, reaching out, and reaching up to form alliances, and not being afraid to collaborate to achieve mutual goals. When I was 20, just a few years ago, like many of you, I was impatient to make change. Obviously, I'm a little older now, but I'm equally impatient and believe that today we need each other and need to make change more than ever before. I'd like to share an analogy. If I go overseas, I have to research a country, study its history, learn the language, meet new people, develop friendships, and so on. But I need help from the people in that country that I am visiting to understand their culture so that I can fully appreciate all that that wonderful experience has to offer. Now, what if we approached our world in the United States that way? You know, each have a special talent, skill, or ability. Each of us have different communities we are affiliated with. Like Eric said earlier, we're a tossed salad of cultures and backgrounds. And maybe by understanding and appreciating our differences, we can help each other to be successful in solving issues and really having an impact on our communities. Our goal today is to start the conversation. Regardless of age, role, or position in society, we can apply allyship in our daily lives. As individual change agents and organizations, can we create an environment where allyship can help us work successfully? If so, then together we can achieve our goals that we view as important and of value. As we begin our panel discussion, I would like to take this time to introduce Jay Spencer Darden, who's the Director of Diversity Initiatives and Community Engagement. Jay works out of the WVU Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. He's a wonderful resource for our students and faculty. And as an only child, I was particularly interested in learning that his coworkers and people who have worked with him on this program describe him as a brother from another mother. So Jay, please help us define allyship.
Thank you so much, Joan, and I want to welcome everybody and just appreciate the fact that you're spending time in this conversation and that you have willingness to take this time out of this day to really be here and be present. The first thing I want to acknowledge is sort of the context of the time we're in. I think it would be remiss to start a conversation on allyship to not acknowledge the insurrection that occurred at the Capitol. And I'm not one who minces words. I'm just going to be really honest about what happened. And you know, really what we saw there was white supremacist reaction, right, against a system that they have typically been benefited by and people of. And so, you know, it's important that as we talk about allyship, and we're going to bring it to the context of race, and we're going to bring it to the context of gender, that we also acknowledge the things that either are working counter to allyship or prevent others from engaging in ally activities. So let's start with this definition of allyship. And because I try to be accessible with my presentations, I'm going to put a couple of definitions in the chat. And so the first sort of definition that I found for allyship, or that I've leveraged for allyship, is a lifelong process of building relationships built on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and traditionally oppressed groups. So I want to talk a little bit about what this means, right? So allyship as a lifelong process means it has to be consistently, considerably engaged, right? Allyship is not something that is accomplished. It is something that is a process. And so in order for us to think of ourselves in this process of allyship, I think it's also important to acknowledge that, you know, we need to use words that accurately reflect where we are in that work. One of the things that I try to do is rather than refer to myself as an ally, I refer to myself as somebody who's aspiring. I'm aspiring to be a feminist. I'm aspiring for racial justice. I'm aspiring to be anti-racist. I'm aspiring to be an ally to the queer community, right? And I think that that's a more accurate way for us to think about this term that we use as allyship as something that we're aspiring to and working towards, because it keeps us vigilant, right? Allyship is another definition. Allyship is a verb. It is about individuals with privileged identities that use their privilege to disrupt oppression while working alongside people who are part of marginalized groups towards realizing equity and social justice. And I just put that in the chat as well. And it's important that I think we bring up these two sort of different definitions, because when we think about allyship, we need to understand that just as Dr. Ibram X. Kendi talked about being an anti-racist and said that there are moments where you can be anti-racist and then be racist, so too are there moments where we can be engaging in allyship and then be engaging in oppression, right? And so it's important to understand that this process is not a linear process. It is not a slow and deliberate march towards, you know, one direction, but it steps forward and steps back. And it engages the people, right? It forces the people to engage one another in ways that are authentic, right? The way that I talk about this is there's sort of these three different roles of allyship, right? One is holding space, one is taking space, and one is yielding space. I'll say it again: holding space, taking space, and yielding space. What does that mean? Holding space means reminding people of who is missing from spaces and conversations and access to opportunity, right? Access to opportunity. We are problematizing the access. We are not problematizing the individuals. And so holding space means that we are constantly reminding ourselves and others that there is something that is fundamentally wrong, preventing people from being present. The second is taking space. And what that means is that it's about standing in a space where those folks have been prohibited from accessing, and not just reminding them that they are not there, but forcing others to actually grapple with what that means. It's to ask questions about how does this affect these people, these groups, these communities, and how is it disparate in those effects? What are we going to do about it, right? The third is yielding space. And what that means is when we are in spaces, when we are in positions of authority and power, it means stepping back and elevating the voices. It doesn't mean speaking for, but it means getting out of the way to allow the people who are directly affected by systems of racism and sexism and homophobia to stand up and speak out, right? And by allow, I even need to challenge myself with using that language, right? Allow makes it seem like they need your permission, and that's not what it is, right? but it's about occupying our space and then stepping out of that space when we know we are needed to step out of that space, right? There's another language beyond allyship that moves into accomplishship, that moves into being a co-conspirator. And these are all action-oriented ways for us to think about being present with, for, and together with other people. And so as we think about being an ally, as we think about developing allyship, right? Just like a person is not fundamentally racist or not racist or anti-racist, a person is not fundamentally an ally, right? A person has to work. A person will make mistakes. I will make mistakes. I will have to be challenged and corrected and redirected in the same way that I'm going to challenge and correct and redirect those around me as we work towards liberation, as we work towards justice, as we work towards equity. This idea of understanding where you exist in relation to privilege and institutions of oppression, and where you can be an ally or an accomplice or a co-conspirator, depending on where you see your role, is absolutely critical, right? It goes beyond just having these conversations. It goes beyond just waving to your Black and brown friends or high-fiving your queer friends, right? And it goes beyond just those things that are, as somebody started our conversation, as being performative, right? And it moves into action. It moves into policy. It moves into demonstrating. It moves into activating others. And so when we think about allyship, we're going to use that term because it's an accessible and it's a broadly acknowledged and understood term. But I want to make sure that these two definitions that I've provided to you all in the chat are really top of mind, right? It's a verb, it's a process, trust, consistency, understanding where you are privileged and how you can utilize those privileged identities in order to dismantle, challenge, and point out oppression. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jay. And we've assembled a great panel of community leaders who are in various areas of allyship. And we're asking our panelists to help us analyze some case studies and recommend plausible methods or approaches to actualizing allyship. Even though our participants are muted, feel free to give us your thumbs up after I make these introductions. It's my privilege to introduce West Virginia Delegate Danielle Walker, Dave Roberts with WVU Extension Agent with Family and Community Development, Dr. Jason Otley, a race scholar, Corey Ferris, Dean of Students at WVU, and Lakaya Blankson, a clinical psychotherapist. And again, as we begin, thank you so much for taking your time today to join us. Our format today is as follows. We have 5 real-world scenarios that were selected by our VISTA team. Each scenario will be displayed on our screen. You'll notice that some of the descriptors are comparable to those that have been used with West Virginia Census. And we'll ask each of our panelists to share their perspectives on these scenarios. Now, our audience is encouraged to place questions and comments in the chat box. And for the best use of time, we'll review your questions and comments after our panel discussion. We've allotted approximately 5 to 10 minutes, depending upon the energy behind each of the issues, for examination of each of the scenarios. So I'm going to read the first one. Jonathan, who is white, works on the sales floor at a large clothing retailer. Over their radio system, Jonathan's manager, Brian, who is also white, asks him to check on a young Black man in the men's section that he thinks could be stealing. After watching the young man for 15 minutes, he sees nothing to indicate Brian's suspicions. Jonathan thinks Brian was racial profiling, but isn't sure. So some of the possible questions that our panel may want to speak to are, what are some of the variables that potentially influence this situation? Is this really an example of racial profiling? Does Jonathan have influence over Brian's career or financial future? How can Brian deal with his boss on this issue in a professional and constructive manner? Which one of our panelists would like to start this discussion?
Oh,
Dean Ferris, you want to take a stab at it? Start us off?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. So
on the surface, oops, oh yeah, I am, but I want to make sure my microphone is on. On the surface, there seems to be an issue, and I think between what I would do, I mean, I guess if I were in that position, I would start asking questions of my supervisor, quite frankly, because for me, if I'm feeling uncomfortable about it, generally my gut's pretty right, you know. So I want to step out, and I'm going to question what did you see that you asked me to have to monitor what this person was doing, and I have to understand where Brian, the supervisor, is coming from before, you know, to me, I can try to do something about it, because when it's out of line, when there's nothing there, if I did that monitoring for 15 minutes and I don't see anything, then I need to understand why that happened so I can fix it, so that my supervisor tries to figure it out and learns differently.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
So,
Something to say. Oh, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
no. I'll happily yield the floor, ma'am.
I think it's something cultural. Being a mother of two Black kings, there's a certain part of when you are bringing up your children who are Black and how to act when they go to a store. With this young man being Black, that's what he's reflecting back to, probably. My mother has taught me, don't touch items unless I really want to purchase them, to keep my hands out of my pocket, to be aware if somebody is watching me, not to get annoyed if the same clerk is asking me within 2 to 3 minutes over and over if I need assistance. And so to have that conversation with someone who is a superior to you is very hard when you've always been oppressed. And to be to transfer of being oppressed to now this Black young man who's working now feels that he's the oppressor. We need to have a conversation with not only the manager, but it seems like that whole company needs to go through a lot of training, implicit bias training, anti-racism training. And I would have that conversation of I didn't see in 15 minutes. And it may be that the person has a special need and that's why they were fidgeting. And I think it's just, you know, it's mighty funny that it stopped at race and didn't consider anything else that could have been part of the situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. Anyone else?
So,
Yeah, really quickly. I was just going to say, you know, that I think with the racial profiling piece of the question really stands out when you look at the scenario and it says young Black male. I think if it just had said young man who has a black hoodie on, or a young man who has a gray sweatshirt on, or a t-shirt, then it can be a different conversation. I used to work retail when I was in high school and also in college. And so I do remember those conversations with a manager when we thought somebody was stealing from our polo wall, our wall that had all of the polo, you know, shirts and polo, you know, socks and hats. And so my manager was Black. And so she would say, this person who has this particular clothing article on looks like they may be stealing. So I think we have to be very careful and conscientious when we start categorizing this Black male or this Black woman may be stealing, because we don't use the terms, at least I've not seen it in retail, this white man or this white woman looks to be stealing. We'll say this woman who has on a Parker coat, or this white man or a man who has on a jean jacket, right? So I think we have to just be very careful to use race in these type of scenarios, because then it does become racial profiling.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, very similar to what Dr. Otley was saying there. I mean, I had the opportunity to work in loss prevention for a couple retail stores coming up, and it's where does that conversation start or stop? There is potential here that could very much highlight some problems through the organization, but you know, there's really some information missing that could indicate, you know, as far as, is there a system going on? Is this, you know, the first time, you know, as we were talking at the start of the conversation, and, you know, even Eric had mentioned in describing himself, just to say male. Now, clearly that is, you know, there's some other ways to descript here, but, you know, we're also, we're thinking, is this systematic? So is it every time that Eric may come into the store, my manager is saying, go check it out. At that point, really raises the flag or an issue, you know, so, and at that point, how does, you know, Jonathan have that conversation with his boss? You know, how can we help Jonathan raise that up? Because again, with that is some of that self-confidence of being able to identify and have that conversation and know what tools may be available.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Alrighty, we'll move on to the next question. And again, we want to encourage our audience to place any questions or comments in the chat box so we can refer to it. And if we've not had an opportunity to cover to the fullest extent each of these questions, we will be taking these questions and adding responses and additional notes to each of these and then place them on our website. The second question or scenario is a high school or middle school history teacher, Hispanic with a class whose majority is minority, worried about the whiteness of the school curriculum. There is a clear lack of instruction on the history of BIPOC and their respective struggles. How much responsibility is there for this history to be taught in schools? Is the duty of teachers, administrators, or students to change that curriculum? What strategy to be used to accomplish this? Who would like to start us off? Dr. Otley, what do you think?
So go back to the scenario, because there's a couple of pieces there that I want to try to tease out. I think that's important that we put it back up because we've only seen it one time.
That's right.
Are you all able to put this? No, it's not showing. I don't see it.
Yeah, it's not shown on the screen. Should I read it again, Dr. Otley?
Yes, ma'am, if you don't mind.
Okay, happy to. A high school or middle school history teacher, Hispanic with a class whose majority is minority, worried about the whiteness of the school's curriculum. There's a clear lack of instruction on the history and the respective struggles. How much responsibility is there for the history to be taught in school? Is it the duty of teachers, administrators, or students to change the curriculum? And then what strategy should be used to accomplish this?
Okay, so I won't tackle the whole question because there's a lot of esteemed panel along with me who can also dive into this. But let me start off the conversation by saying that the responsibility of the books that we use, the curriculum that we use really comes from those who are designing the books, right? And the majority of those who are designing books are companies and organizations that have predominantly white males who are sitting in leadership. And so when we talk about what's being taught in our classrooms, we have to be careful that we don't place the onus and responsibility on the teacher solely, because the teacher is just using the manuscript or textbook that the school system has ordered. And the responsibility also doesn't lie with the principal, because the principal is only answering to the superintendent of the public school system. right? And so we have to look at what books are we ordering to go to the schools that we're sending it out to, because also the books are carefully aligned to the state tests, right? So we're testing our students based upon the curriculum and the books that are being designed. And sadly, our teachers have the responsibility of creating a complement, a historical complement to what's not being told. And I use sadly because it should not be their sole responsibility. It should be the responsibility of those who are creating the books, who are being brought into the school systems, you know, who are being signed out by the superintendents, who are passed on through the principals, and then now the teachers have to teach this curriculum, right? So I think that as we look at where the responsibility lies, we have to be very careful that we don't put the onus on the teachers, the onus on the principal, but we look at our superintendents of public school systems and in their contracts they have with those who are designing these books.
Great, thank you. Jay, is there anything you might want to add to this before I defer to our other panelists?
I'm sorry, you cut out there, Joan. What was it?
Jay, I was going to defer to Jay for a quick minute before I defer to some of our other panelists.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can jump in. So thanks again, Joe, for letting me be a part of this conversation. And, you know, I'm looking forward to being a part in any other way. But I think part of what's really important, right, is there's a couple of layers to this question, right? And I want to always bring it back to this idea of allyship, of what does it mean to be an ally in this situation, right? So the first thing is when the teacher is worried about the quote whiteness of the school's curriculum, what exactly are we talking about? What's the question, right? And so of course there's things like narratives of Black folks only being presented as being enslaved and then being liberated by white folks and then taking part in the civil rights movement and then a Black president, right? And so that's sort of one of those ways that our curriculum is very, very white, right? But it's also about this colonizer and this sort of manifest destiny narrative that shows and positions Native folks as being impediments to progress as opposed to inheritance of progress, which is often how white folks are positioned, right? And so I wanted to first sort of highlight the question that's being asked here, right? And so then the question is, what does this mean, right? What does it mean for the responsibility of the teachers, for the administrators, for policymakers, for the students within the class? And the first thing is, it's really hard for the students who hold the least formal authority or the least position, power position, to be the ones to demand, expect, and then, you know, administer a accurate portrayal of, in this case, their history or social studies curriculum, right? And so while there's responsibility and obligation on the part of the students, really it's the ones in more formal positions to hear the needs of the students and then respond to the needs of the students or the parents or the community, right? And so I want to leave it to the panelists to go deeper and to keep pulling that thread. But when we think about this in the context of allyship, right, the question is really allied to whom, how, and what are we going to do? What is the process going to look like? What does the consensus building have to look like, and those kinds of things? Thank you, Joan, for letting me jump in.
Great insight. Okay, anybody else that would like to add to that? Danielle?
So there's a lot here. Who's responsible? Yeah. I'm part of the legislature. We can take that up in the Committee of Education, but then it goes and it funnels down through local control. So this is where you need to get involved with your LSIC and your Board of Education members and to look at this. But let's look at the state of West Virginia. If it's not in a movie or in a book, then we really don't know about it. Why was it the first time that many West Virginians had only heard of Katherine Johnson, had only heard of Dorothy Vaughan, had only heard of Mary Jackson? That movie and that title was very profound, Hidden Figures. And so how would an administrator, a teacher, allow students to have a safe space and to create that allyship in those classrooms? And this doesn't mean that you hush the student when they are speaking their truth and when they are speaking their history, because it is being taught at home or in the community. And so it responsibility that is part of that school district, that is part of that school system, to bring this up to the powers that be. And it must not fall on deaf ears. And so this is where you need those allies to really use their privilege, not only to start the conversation, because to start the conversation is easy. Words without works are a waste. Black history is not a waste. All history is not a waste, but we should not forget the trials and tribulations, the good, the bad, and indifferent. Thank you.
And Delegate Walker, what I'm also hearing is that everybody has to assume part of that responsibility, all the way up and down the line, and regardless of whether you're an elected official or whether you're a teacher. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, you did, but it should not fall on the students, as we often let that fall on the students a lot. From the government, state government, voting and passing this, then it goes down to our local Board of Education and our local board members. Those board members now give a training manual, or they come all together and they say what we're going to do with this curriculum. Then it goes to the administrators of those schools, who usually the principals are, whoever's over the history department. And then it funnels down through the teachers. So let's not, there's a disconnect. And we see it all the time in the classroom when students come home frustrated because they're being taught one-sided history, or they feel that their history is not important. And so even when you have it in the curriculum, we need to make sure that we have data that it's being carried through there.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in on this one?
I wanted to just piggyback off of what the delegate said. She made a really good point about, it shouldn't be the students' responsibility. I mean, they're children, and as we're growing up, it can be a little bit dangerous to put adult responsibilities on children. So I think that we should be able to hold a space for kids to, give their input on it. I definitely think that they should be heard, because, we shouldn't have that whole, stay in the child's place type mentality, but we should, give them space to speak their minds about it, because, they're not dumb. So we should hold that space to listen to them, but it's not the responsibility of the students themselves. And when we are talking about, I think someone had mentioned like holding space. I think that's a really good way to do that. But I also just wanted to point out that, this whole thing could be really, really uncomfortable, especially with the last scenario as well. Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable with these, with any of these types of situations or scenarios is a must, because we cannot grow if we do not get uncomfortable. And I mean, there's one quote that I'm thinking about, Martin Luther King said himself, is that the failures of the past must not be an excuse for the inaction of the present and the future. So when we think about, the stuff that we learned or the stuff that we didn't learn when we were in school and how we feel about that now, we can use that as a lesson and actually do something about it now. So I think that that's, it is a collective responsibility, and, leaving out certain parts of history and that kind of others, especially, the Black and Indigenous people's stories, if they are, it's all American history. I don't think, any of it should be left out. And we should really get comfortable with being uncomfortable when we start to talk about that and address it and start to actually put things in place, like policies and procedures or what have you.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on to number 4?
Joan, I wanted to say
I'm
something
sorry.
real quick.
Go ahead.
So let me cancel this thing. So Joan, one of the things I wanted to say, I think is, as Lakaya has said, and I'm gonna keep this short and sweet. I think one of the things when we talk about young people in the developmental stage that they're in, one of the biggest challenges is right at that moment, you're trying to define who you are. So to find courage and understand what courage is something that you acquire through wisdom and through experience. So I think that one of the things we have to realize, if we're giving this information out to our audience, and some of you guys are young people who are students here, who are 20 some years old, 18 some years old, 40 some years old student, you have to know that it does require you to be uncomfortable and walk with that and finding courage. So understand that this is about experiential. So it's not going to be a concept you say, I can do this and this and this. It's really going to be about trial and error and understanding what is your intention behind this. Is my intention to save someone, or is my intention to be a homie, to be an ally? And understand that my homie is experiencing something that I have not experienced, but I know that I can be there for them in some manner. Thank you, Joan.
Thanks. All right, we'll move along just due to time on to the next one. I believe we're on number 3. And it states a college student who identifies as white logs on to Instagram to check their feed, and they notice that many of the people they follow are posting a graphic on their stories protesting a recent event in their community where an act of violence happened to a person of color. As someone who thinks of themselves as an ally, the student reposts the graphic to their story as well as shows support. What is slacktivism? How do we empower ourselves to address this issue beyond the social media screen? What is one thing that we could do to spark real change regarding this situation? And how do we increase the students' involvement in making change happen? Who would like to start us off? Delegate Walker, what do you think?
Oh, I think a lot. I think a lot. I appreciate the sharing of pictures on social media. I appreciate it staying on the internet. What I don't appreciate is where we can share those images without contacting law enforcement first. What I don't appreciate is that we can share those images, and when there is someone who is not agreeing in what you are stating in support, and you overlook that comment, and your allyship and being an ally becomes complacent. Silence can be violence.
Mm-hmm.
Being one of those persons who not only shared a murder that we all witness over and over again, I joined peaceful protest. I will be introducing legislation in 2021. I've attended county commission meetings, city council meetings. I've taken it back to my neighborhood and even my home. So what can a student do? Welcome the community to your free speech zone, because within that neighborhood, BIPOC, people voices are not welcome. What a student can do is educate us and elaborate, and do not ignore what the dark past is still teaching us. What a student can do is take the lead in this, because it is past time that we let them lead. Thank you.
Great points. Corey, we defer to you, and then maybe after Corey, David. Corey, do you want to start us off next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm with what Delegate Walker just said. I mean, she's using her voice and her ability to make that change. And so those people that are posting on Instagram have to use the tools that are available to them to call out and make that change also. And it's hard. But we're not going to get anywhere unless we step out and we open up our community and we participate and make the change where we can. I mean, as Delegate Walker said, she's gone to commission meetings, she's gone to council meetings, and with her role now in the state legislature, she can introduce legislation. And so, but not everyone's in the role that Delegate Walker's in, but where are we in our own community? Is it our church? Is it our classroom? Where is it that we can step out and make the change in the world, in our, I'll say, our little corner of the world? Because if each of us are making the change in our little corner of the world, then that broadens to the greater community.
Thank you. David.
You know, yeah, I believe, you know, what's been said is absolutely correct. As a person that really doesn't have a large social media presence, I find that I struggle sometimes. There's times I want to put some information out, but on the same note, I don't want that to come across as ingenuine. I don't want to another thoughts and prayers floating down the line, or a like, or you know what I mean. So some of that I do try to be intentional with what information I'm putting out. On the same note, though, and Dean, as you was mentioning, where I can and try to take that information is my community. If I'm at the, you know, at the Lions Club meeting, if I'm sitting in tutors one morning, wherever that discussion may be happening, to try and have that discussion there. I can talk with individuals that, you know, I'm very close with, and we can have a conversation on, so let's recognizing that, you know, what's going on is something I haven't experienced. I can see how I'm going to look at it from that other angle. We can have that conversation at an intimate, you know, level. But, you know, about how to get past, and I believe that's what they're referring to with the slackism. But, you know, not want to also represent that, but actually have those conversations with people that are community.
Anybody like to add anything else before we move on to scenario number 4? Alrighty, number 4, you invite your friend Jamie, who's Black, to join you for another friend, Alex's birthday party. At the party, you see a large Confederate flag displayed on the wall. Jamie tells you that the flag makes them uncomfortable. You mention it to Alex, but they brush it off saying, "Oh, that's my roommate. No big deal. Just ignore it." You promised Alex you'd be at the party to celebrate with them, but you're worried that pressing the issue further will ruin their birthday. However, Jamie is clearly upset and you want to be supportive of them. What do you do?
There's not a whole lot of discussion there. If Jamie is with me, especially if Jamie is with me, one, I'll have a conversation with, you know, my friend and/or about his roommate, but we're out. I mean, like I said, there's no, that's just the end of it.
So if they're uncomfortable, you just leave the social gathering. That way you can just move on and do something that's not going to make anybody uncomfortable.
Well, I mean, right. It's not a matter of, you know, at that point, and definitely not telling, you know, my friend, well, don't worry about it or don't think about it. Because, you know, once again, that's a scenario that I don't know. But, you know, if you're uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable and we're out. You know, now, you know, some extent, and to some point, you know, we kind of start to know and learn our friends, and, you know, most likely I may or may not be back to celebrate Alex's next birthday. Yeah, most likely not, if that's the kind of, you know, environment, but definitely, you know, like I said, if Jamie's with me and Jamie's uncomfortable, we're out.
That's good. Anybody have anything else they'd like to add on this one? Okay, moving on to number 5.
Wait a minute, Joan. Wait a minute,
I'm
Joan.
sorry, go for it.
No, we can't move on.
Yeah.
Richard.
I
I'm
gotta
sorry.
There you go.
We can't do
You
that.
know, I've always
We're
been
not
one
gonna
of
do that.
Yeah, I've been one of those
Yeah,
people that
yeah.
always be really, I think I'm going to be very, in my own most authentic voice, I don't know how to code switch. So I think if I came with my homie, and my homie don't look like me, right? And my homie, we go someplace, and his homie has something that he know that ain't cool. I hope that my boy got my back and is going to say, hey, yo, happy birthday, we out. And if the other guy has something to say about it in a way that is maybe rude or disrespectful or unsympathetic, or not sympathetic, unempathetic to my situation, then I am quite sure that my dude Dave is going to have my back on that, because we're going to stand there together. I think it's no different in any relationship. There's times where we stand right next to each other. There's times where my friend might stand in front, and there's times I may stand in front. And just the ebb and flow of love and the reciprocal nature of respect. You know what I'm saying? But I got to know that my dude stands for something. I knew when we went to the party that Dave was either going to be on point or he was going to be whack. I knew that. So I can't pretend. So I think it's about being genuine and being a real being a real friend behind the lip service, behind the performative bullcrap of it, but to actually stand for something. Say, you know what? This stuff, I almost said it. This ain't comfortable. But I'm okay with that discomfort, because we're going to keep it moving.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Look, Danielle or Lakaya?
I go ahead. Go ahead, Lakaya.
Oh, thank you. So again, what stood out to me about that whole situation was that even when we just read that scenario, right, there was an extreme amount of discomfort. Like there was, you can sense it. There was an extreme amount of discomfort, and we, wanted to rush past it. When I am in therapy and there is a situation that comes up like that, I sit there. I sit in it. You have to sit in that in order to not just bury it, because when you bury stuff like that, nothing is achieved. In full disclosure, I don't have any friends who think that the Confederate flag is okay. So I wouldn't be in that situation, but we do have to think about, if you are in this situation, you have to think about yourself. You have to think about what your biases are, what your blind spots are. Are you someone who is actually, do you really know what the Confederate flag is? Or do you have a narrative that is telling you, basically, did you grow up with the story that the Confederate flag is okay? It's just, it represents Southern pride, or did you grow up with the story of that is, that flag represents treason against America. It represents, everything that is horrible, when it comes to, Black people and keeping them enslaved. Like, what is your story behind that? What did you learn about that? Do you think it's okay or not? And are you ready to actually challenge that? Not ruin anybody's birthday, but, are you ready to actually challenge that narrative that you have in yourself? Because if you're not at that stage where you actually want to change your viewpoint of it, having your friends back is going to be a lot harder. And I just saw that whole thing with the whole discomfort when we read that scenario. That's what I wanted to say.
That's great. Thank you.
So
Go ahead.
I was Jamie. I'm reading this and I'm reverting back to when I was 8 in Girl Scouts. I am Jamie.
Yeah.
I grew up down south in Louisiana. And I remember seeing that flag. I didn't even like watching Dukes of Hazzard because of that flag, because it's not what it displayed to them, but it was what the generational trauma it was to me. where you seen a lynching, where you seen white supremacy, you always seen that flag. Now, it didn't matter of the history that I learned when I was in K through 12. It was what I had out in the community in reference to that flag. And so it is one thing to leave the party, but we need to have a conversation before we leave that party. You sense my uncomfortableness, and I may have told you, but then I tell you the depths of that uncomfortableness. And are you going to come back and tell me it's heritage, not hate? Whose heritage? And why did you even bring me here? So that's one part of it. And when we leave from the party, what is now going to be our extended conversation, my friend? Ourselves to truly open up to our friends. And because we left that day, we should be able to return and continue to have that true allyship. I can't be a promoter of change if I never know what the other person is thinking. I can't be a promoter of change if I can't be uncomfortable for many moments to be part of a movement. And that movement doesn't need an adjective at the time. We just know it's a movement. Mm-hmm. And so when we see these things of Confederate flags and gallows and nooses, you need to understand as allies, what you've seen in the Western is something very different that we've seen in the Black communities, whether it was in the segregated redlining part of town or whether it was on the plantation. Come on, y'all. Mm-hmm. Go back to that whiteness history. And so now we're bringing things into full revelation. Thank you. I couldn't pass that up. We had to talk about that one.
Well, and you're absolutely right, and thank you for bringing that up because, you know, as I said, it's been able to have that conversation. It's been able to trust in ourselves and our friends and essentially identifying and knowing that my experience is different than your experience, and I need to be able to recognize that, accept, and appreciate it, you know. And honestly, it really comes down to once you know better, we got to do better. You know, I very much, you know, I had that flag one time with Hank Williams Jr. face on it on my room in college. It was nothing but I don't know, went along with the song that he sang. It was at anything, a version of or a form of rebellion against a man. You know, I'm 18, 19, you can't tell me how to live. But when I learned or saw or realized from a discussion that it was offensive to my friend, out, you know, it's not it's not above that on, you know, that's how, you know, again, but I had to be able to see or know or be able to recognize that. So, but thank you, you're right. It's how we look at that.
That's great. Jason, can we bring you into this conversation? What are your thoughts?
That's a really good scenario. I think that, you know, when the friend acknowledged the discomfort, first of all, one friend says, hey, I'm uncomfortable. The other friend said, oh, okay, I'm acknowledging your discomfort. But I don't think that the friend who acknowledged the discomfort was looking through the right lens. And so having to be educated on why you're uncomfortable. Sometimes we don't take the next step. Please share with me the history behind your discomfort. And that takes time. And going to a party, you're not thinking about having that kind of long, laborious conversation. So a lot of that can be lost. But when you look through the lens of racial supremacy, it says that my race is superior to yours. And so for someone to say, it's okay, let's just go ahead to the party or ignore it, that's the lens you're looking through. Mm-hmm. Even if you're unconscious to it, you're still looking through the lens of my race is superior than yours. But racial equality says that our races are equal. We're fighting for equality. And so I think it's incumbent upon when friends are going to outings and they're supporting one another through racial discomfort, they have to really look through the lens of racial equality. And I'm equal to you, you're equal to me. So if you're uncomfortable, that means there's discomfort for me because we're friends, we're family. You the homie, we hang out. And so I think until we take on the lens of we're equal, we won't always understand someone's discomfort. It's not enough to say, I get it theoretically, but no, do you get it because we're family? Do you get it because we're friends? Do you get it because we're one?
Yeah. And I know when I was younger, I never looked at the Confederate flag that way because I had no way of knowing that until I had friends who were Black who said, well, Joan, you really need to understand what's behind all of that. And again, until you stop and have that conversation and take that quality time to do that and ask those questions, or someone asserts themselves and says, do you really understand what this means? We'll never know, and we'll never be able to make any changes. And that includes following up with a person who happened to have the Confederate flag on the wall, and having that conversation with that person, and saying, we need to make you aware of what's going on and how that's just being perceived and how that can impact others. Anybody else would like to add to that? Okay, number 5. There's been a debate in your hometown recently about the high school mascot, which is named after a Native American tribe and uses Native American imagery. You and one of your friends were involved in the Pep Squad together and sometimes wore a feather headdress at football games. In a conversation with them, they tell you, some of my favorite memories from high school are from those football games. I'm supposed to be ashamed of the fun I had in high school? And anyway, it's not making fun of Native Americans, it's actually honoring them because it's like they're fierce and they're powerful. You don't want a wimpy mascot, although you want to be an ally and have concerns about the mascot, you also have fond memories from these football games. And you're worried that it will seem disingenuous for you to oppose the mascot. Is this racism? What is an effective way to respond to your friend? How can you be an ally and address the issue? Is the student complicit or misled or ignorant of these nuances? Kaya, would you like to start us off?
Oh, sure. So that's another question that has a lot to it. Because I think when faced with something, like when someone questions you about something that you have enjoyed, that's been a part of your, I guess, identity. I mean, it's kind of hard because a lot of people are like, that's not, it's so different because when you get into this whole thing of cultural appropriation, and especially when you talk about Native American history of how, it was so easy, considering like their whole history and what happened to them, in the past, like that's just a lot to unpack. And I think when someone addresses something like that, and then the person's first reaction is to say, well, am I supposed to be ashamed of it? That's their limbic system popping up. That's their fight or flight system popping up. Because that's not the point. It's not about you, being ashamed of who you are or where you're from. It's about acknowledging what something is doing to someone else. Like it's the impact. That's the whole issue. It's the impact, not what your intent is. So I think that I can't remember exactly what the questions were under all of that, but I think it's just important to know that there has to be a focus on, thank you for putting that back up. like when it talks about you want to be an ally and you have concerns about the mascot and you're fond of memories and everything of the football games, I don't think your memories of having fun and all of that at the football game has anything to do with how, you know, the Native American history and all of that can be offensive to people of that culture, you know? So when you get into, when they brought up that was the first question that brought up to me, like, am I supposed to be ashamed of the fun I had in high school? That's against the point. That's you know, getting defensive about something that is, you know, that has been brought to you. So being really careful to not just act out of your limbic system, which is where the seat of your emotions are. Don't act out of your emotions. You know, you have to put your prefrontal cortex on. You have to engage that part of your brain to really sit and listen and understand. Listen to understand, not listen to react or listen to respond when somebody's bringing up an issue like this. And again, that's with the stages of change. You know, there's a lot of people who don't see anything that's wrong with having a mascot, you know, that's a Native American and from a tribe. You know, that's in the contemplation stage. That's where people do not think that there is an issue at all. So you have to consider, you know, where people are, where you are on that stage of change. Yeah, and go from there. That's you know, my whole thing.
That's great. Thank you. Anyone else like to add their thoughts?
Joan, I'll say, I mean, I do think it's just another form of symbolism that people don't understand. You know, whatever that is from, you know, years past and how it hurts people. And, you know, again, how do we get people to open up to what may have been perceived as acceptable in the past? You know, people just didn't understand how it hurt, how it made fun of, or what it fully represented, you know, then as well as now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what does it take for it to be a normal conversation to stand up for your ally, you know, to be an ally? What does it take to do that? And it's so easy to exhibit the fight or flight and get defensive. But until such time as we figure out, you know, great ways to be sensitive to that, but at the same time sensitive to the fact that we've got to address the issue and there's a way of being able to do it, and we continue to push forward to address those issues, then people like myself or others, okay, we may just sit back and say, gee, I didn't really understand that stereotype. I didn't even understand that perception. Okay, now I get it. So I should do what differently? And then the conversation becomes so much easier as we help each other understand. Jason, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think the group who've spoken have really said some really great things about it. Nothing to add.
Okay. Anybody else?
I do want to add a little bit, just a little small thing. I think it goes along with what Dave said earlier about the Confederate flag. I'm quite sure at that concert, the Leonard Skinner concert, I'm probably sure he turned up and had a great time. And him turning up and having a great time had nothing to do with the flag. Had nothing to do with that. And he had to unpack that to understand that his experience is separate from some of the symbolism that was there. So to understand that your experience in high school has nothing to do with some of those fringe things, some of those aesthetics about that. It was really about it was really about my relationship with others, my relationship in an activity. It had nothing to do with the fringe. But as Lakaya said, from a very psychotherapist position, which I appreciate, it's really about coming from a different place in the brain. But to be able to sit in that moment, to be able to unpack that takes courage. And I think one of the biggest tools that we have to use to be an ally is courage and becoming okay with being uncomfortable with being courageous. Some people believe that discomfort comes separate from courage, and I believe that they go hand in hand.
And that's the theme throughout all of our conversations, is to be able to be, like I said, comfortable with that. And that in itself is difficult, but, you know, have that conversation or start to realize in ourselves that our response is, oh, yep, but wait, or well, what about this, or what about that? And we're deflecting or shielding it somewhere else. That is that. You need to examine that, you know, because at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's not about us. Once we can get ourselves out of the discussion, you're able to look and see a little bit more about what's going on there.
Great.
Mm,
Any other comments? All right, well, moving right along. We're going to phase out of the panel discussion, but we do have lots of questions that have been placed in the chat box, and we want to encourage our audience to continue to place your questions in the chat box as we move forward. And I'd like to, again, thank each of our speakers for their contributions and helping us to process each of these real-world scenarios so that we are together trying to start to have this conversation. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our Assistant Director of the WVU Center for Service and Learning, Eric Murphy.
Hello, everybody. So right now we're going to go into our question and answer period. I really hope that we can do this. Wait a minute. Okay, I got my spotlight here. I'm hoping that we can do this in a way that's effective. So with that being said, Chelsea, would you like to read off a question from the chat that we can throw out there to our audience? Or do you have some already pointed out for me, homie? There's a lot of good stuff in this chat. I hope you guys, participants or people who are in our audience, are checking out these chat because it's mean. So I'm gonna read one of the questions. Chelsea, start telling me what I need to go. So oh, your sound's not working? Okay, got it. So Chelsea's sound isn't working at the moment, so here we go. As allies, how would you recommend having conversations with your friends to learn about their experiences without adding the pressure of making them feel like they represent the whole community, or without having them have to teach us about oppression that they face? So how do we engage that conversation with our homie in a way that does not put pressure on them to represent the whole race? Like if I'm talking to you, I don't represent every black dude. I represent this black dude, me. So how do you do that? Delegate Walker, what do you think?
My truth is my truth. I don't stand for every black woman in West Virginia or in America. And so that's the beauty in this. You be uncomfortable enough to have the conversation with me as your friend. And then you be proactive enough to ask me who else you can speak to about this. That is being a true ally. It may have been uncomfortable for you to ask me, but it was comfortable enough for you to befriend me on what level? What was that platform of our friendship? So now we need to broaden things now. So that may mean that now you may need to have a conversation with my mother, with my father, with my neighbor who lives next door to me, because we are in the same hood. It doesn't mean that we have the same story. It doesn't mean that we have the same truth. And I think that's where that lies. You're not putting a burden on me, because as your friend, it's gonna bring us a different bond, because now you're opening up your vulnerability of something that I've always had to live with. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add to this?
Hey, Murph, so I'm about to get real comfortable because you're our fraternity brothers and you're moderating now. So, this question is very poignant, and I'll say this as a black man from Washington, D.C., who grew up in D.C. in the 80s when D.C. was the murder capital of the world, and then coming to West Virginia University for undergrad. I experienced different blackness. So for those who are listening and think there's just one blackness, there is not. From a DC metropolitan city to a very rural state where there were blacks who grew up in the state of West Virginia, the way that we as blacks saw life was totally different. The way that we addressed conflict was totally different. the way our circle of friends and circle of influence was totally different. So it's hard for for people to look at a particular person and quantify them as you're Black, so I understand what that means. That means you like fried chicken. That means that you like sports, and that means you like rap music. Every Black person doesn't like those things, right? And so I think that we need to also focus on how important our individuality is, number one, but two, recognize that if you are a person of color, particularly Black, stepping into a predominantly white space, there are challenges, there are terrains that are unfamiliar, there are things that you will not know how to navigate, and it does take a collective effort of all people to help people who are in situations where they aren't comfortable navigating, right? So that's all of our white brothers and sisters who are out there who may reside in states that are like West Virginia, right? Where I went for undergrad, and it was 5% Black on campus at the time, right? There were a great number of white students, white peers, white faculty members, white leaders on campus who helped me as a Black male navigate the terrain of West Virginia. But they also didn't place me in a box of, we know what Black people are like. They said, you're Black, but we also know what Jason is like too. So it's two different constructs that I think that we have to really look at.
Thank you very much, Jason. Bruh, you know you spitfire. I dig you. Let me just go right here to J. Spencer Darden. Could you chime in on this, brother? I wanted to pull you in here, and we're short for time, but hey, audience, if you guys want to stay on for an additional 15 more minutes, we'll go to 3:45, 3:50, and then we'll cut this out because we have some resources and a person in our audience that I definitely have to introduce you guys. If you go to WVU, I definitely need to introduce you to Miss Hooper, because I'm gonna mess her first name up and everybody be hating on me. So Jay Spence, why don't you give us something, brother? You're muted, bro. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So first, thank you again for letting me be a part of this. This is a really, really great question. And I think it's a couple of things that I want to point out. The first is you're going to hear people who hold marginalized identities, whether it's folks of color, queer folks, whomever, folks with disabilities. You're going to hear them say constantly, it's not my job to educate you. And so what that means, right, is that if you hear about their experience, that there's something you can use that experience towards, right? You can go to Google, right? That's a great democratization of knowledge, and seek out, you know, if we're talking about Black folks in this particular instance, Black voices, Black sources, Black empirical evidence of what the Black lived experience is. The second thing is part of what Dr. Otley was pointing out is the idea of having a racialized experience, right? And so, you know, my race is not a definitive characteristic about who I am or what I like, but we have a shared racialized experience as being labeled as Black men in the United States, Dr. Otley and myself. And so it's important to learn about what that means. What are these racialized experiences? How do these stereotypes being applied to different races promote or perpetuate these racialized experiences, right? So when we were talking about Native American imagery and mascots, right? You know, this is a really, you know, sort of poignant discussion that's even happening locally here in Morgantown. But, you know, one of the things that I often point out to folks is, okay, so you have Native mascots. Who else are typically mascots? And they're typically, if it is a person, a stereotype or a caricature of a person who is not, you know, a majority group, or it's an animal. Right? And so what does that say? If it's either a caricature of a person or an animal, and that's sort of the two camps that act as mascots, what does that say about who these people are, right? So the first is to not expect that just because your friend or colleague holds this identity that they're the one to teach you. But the second thing, right, is to being able to seek out these voices, these narratives, these experiences, because they're more accessible now than ever. And, you know, that's part of what my job is to do, is to help characterize what these racialized experiences are, these gendered experiences are. But then there's also a lot of brilliant faculty on our campus who study these things and teach these things. Dr. Otley studies and teaches these things, and a myriad of staff who continue to promote this work as well.
Hold on a second, Jay, and I'm loving it, but I'm getting some questions. Somebody said, I love fried chicken. Ridiculous. All right, so I got a question for you here, audience. This is a good one, I think, from one of our people here. If I'm in a club or on a board that wants diversity in its membership to be represented in the community, what are some ways to do that without engaging in tokenism? Oof. I see Delegate Walker is feeling it. So Delegate Walker, would you like to share with us?
Oh my goodness. Great question. I don't know where it came from. But once you start engaging with that BIPOC person, the most insulting thing you can tell that person, and it has happened to me time and time again, where are the other Black people? I am not your savior. I don't work for you. We are on this board together because we have a like interest. Can you get out of your comfort zone and drive the county, the city, the state? When you see a BIPOC person in the grocery store, can you engage with them? Because what is your true mission and objective on this board? I appreciate you wanting the DEI, but until you start putting in, it's one thing to do a job. You've all heard that speech. 2021, it's time for you to start putting in work. It's a new thing. It's uncomfortable. We're gonna have to sweat. It's gonna bring some tears. And what it is gonna even bring some blood, because we're gonna have to look at our past, right? And so tokenism is just as bad as segregation.
Thank you, Diane. Representative Walker, thank you so much. Wait a minute, I gotta pull this around because Dean Ferris, I got to ask you that same question. You know, we, students are here talking about, some things that we have done, about how it looks. How do we respect and honor diversity without creating the performative tokenism vantage point? How do we do that, Dean Ferris?
I don't know if I have the answer. I mean, Delegate Walker said it right. I mean, it is about interests. And so, you want someone to join your organization or be on your board or be a part of what you're doing because of their interests, not because you want the representative of, a Black or brown person or a gay person or an Asian or something like that. Build an organization, build a board, build a program that you want people to be a part of. And I use that word people, not Black or brown or gay or lesbian or whatever, but build the organization that draws in the community.
Thank you.
Hey, Murph, I got to jump in real quick, and it's good to see my good friend Corey Ferris. Those who don't know, I worked for Corey years ago. I was an RA, and Corey was running all the housing. Now he's dean of students. He got all kinds of hats. Corey, good to see you. But one of the things that Corey was just saying was building the infrastructure for what you need. And what I believe that West Virginia University, West Virginia, the state, and then the rest of the nation needs to understand is, in order to move beyond tokenism, you've got to put people of color in positions and give them autonomy. Too many organizations and institutions of higher education are creating positions for people of color, but there's no real power there, and there's no real autonomy. You making good money, you bringing people of color in who probably not made more than 5 digits. Now you're giving them 6 digits. Now they're making 6 figures. And so because they've not come from a family where they've made 6 figures and they're able to do things with money and for family they've never been able to do before, they're okay now with having to be the puppet to the puppeteer. But in order to move beyond that, you got to understand that when you create these positions for people of color and you want them to lead, you've got to give them power to lead and the autonomy to lead, and stop trying to micromanage something you've not experienced.
Spit fire, bro. Spit fire. Golly. Thank you, Dr. Otley. So I'm just thinking, I'm looking here at some of the other questions. I think we've answered quite a few of these, but I want to introduce someone to you guys all on here. There's some resources in our audience that, and there's a brand new resource on our campus here, and I want to introduce this person, Miss Hooper. Hopper.
Come on. How do you say it?
Hopper, Felicia.
There you go. Yes, yes.
Felicia is
We're
our
learning.
new BIPOC counselor at the center. At the Carew Center. Could you tell them what your position is here at WVU, Felicia? What that entails?
Yes, I will. And for anybody else that needs some clarification, it's Felicia. I'll give everybody some time to get used to it. It's okay. It happens. It's I just roll with it by now, but I do expect people to learn it. But anyways, yeah, I'm excited to be at Caruth. This is the first ever BIPOC specialist position. So I'm just thrilled, by this opportunity, and also by the fact that the university recognized this need for our Black students, our brown students, and all students of color. Part of my role is kind of traditional to be a clinician. So I'll be doing individual therapy. Myself and another clinician at Caruth, Ife, will be running a BIPOC or BIPOC support group this coming semester. Also, some other things that I will be doing is just really a good bit of outreach. For me, my kind of personal goal is to go on what I'm calling like a listening tour. I want to engage with students. I want to hear from students. And I kind of want to take that and marry it with the ideas that I have for this position about how to better engage with students, how to provide support, how myself and other staff can truly hold space for students as they're navigating not just being a college student, being a college student of color in a white space, and then just these crazy, I don't normally use that word, but I couldn't think of anything else at this moment, but just the stuff that's going on in our world today. So that's my goal. I'm excited to be here. I'm ready to get started, and I'm just hoping that I can just work with other diversity stakeholders on this campus to really, really, really work towards true inclusion for our students.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I want to say that there are many people on this call. Asuri, Miss Carter, Akia Carter, Anitra Hamilton, Amaya. There's so many people on this call that are wonderful people in the community and wonderful students here at WVU who want to make an impact. So with that being said, there's going to be a survey that's going to be put out here for you guys, students, to please engage in that conversation through the survey, answer those questions that we'll send out to everyone. The other part to this is, remember, this is not a day off. Take this content, take this conversation, and have a conversation with your friends. Either they look like you or don't look like you. Use this opportunity to do something today, even if that's cognitive. Do something about this today. This is the beginning of the university with support from Student Life, with support from our director, Dr. Christy Wood Turner, to actually provide an opportunity for us to create something different. This is not about the drama of life. This is about creating something that is different. And I hope that you guys all feel charged with that. I hope that you see, and I can't control this, and neither can Chelsea. Hope you see this as not something that's performative. Hopefully you see this as something that's beginning of something different. Hopefully you see that this could be something that's, didn't nobody on here code switch? Didn't nobody on here tell you what's up? This is about change, turning the page and changing the narrative. Hopefully you guys understand that and see that. Please utilize your social media if you would like to talk about what you got out of this. And if you didn't get very much out of it, then you're missing the point of what Lakaya said, that this is the beginning from an action step. We have not even touched the contemplative nor the pre-contemplative position of how we even got here. That is content for other units that we can share and make sure that I have this recorded. We will be sharing this recording with people. So with that being said, the panelists, if you can give us one small word, phrase before we leave this out, please. Dean Ferris, you get to go first because you my brother from another mother.
Look, I mean, to me, the best thing is to be that ally is to be authentic and to be who I am, but also to listen and to learn and to question what's going on around me, because again, I know the world through my lens. I don't know the world through someone else's lens. And so I know my lens. I mean, you know, you keep keeping with that metaphor. I wear contact lenses and I wear glasses, and it helps me bring things into focus. And so it's the lens, and it's the limits of my lens. My vision's not perfect, and so I need those around me to help be that better ally. But because I do know that I've been lucky and blessed in life with what I have, and so how do I be that ally to help someone else?
Thank you, Dean Ferris. Delegate Walker, give us a little tidbit of knowledge. Give us a jewel before we leave out of here.
We said it over and over again today. Allyship is a verb. So what I have to leave you with is something that I have spoken to many of you about. Words without works are a waste. You are not a waste. It is time that we start putting in work. And that work is being uncomfortable. That work is educating ourselves. And that work is making sure that allyship is a verb. I thank each and every one of you. I placed my contact information in the chat. I am your delegate while you are here at WVU. I am one of 5. I want to hear any policy ideas so we can continue to move West Virginia forward and put all West Virginians first. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Delegate Walker. Dave Roberts, give us that little jewel of knowledge from Lincoln County, brother.
You know, with it, and as we move through, and kind of like what I was saying, it's a constant self-evaluation. I got to be able to make sure I don't allow myself to get in my own way. And you know, when I start to see or hear some of that discussion of, well, what about this or what about that, or that's not the discussion, but that's the warning of how can we approach this? There's something wrong there. If I can't have that conversation, what's going on, and how can I step back and look at that and get another perspective? I won't know exactly your perspective because I don't know your experience, but I have to know it's different, and how can I step back and, you know, how can we meet somewhere and talk about it?
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. Ms. Lakaya, psychotherapist, could you please give us that wisdom?
Well, I think it's important to know that, just like it's been said here already, that to see a radical change, whether it's in yourself, like the way that you think and the way that you act, or just to see a radical change in your community as a whole, it's not going to happen, you know, in an instant moment, like a Thanos snap, you know, for all the Marvel fans out there. It's not going to happen instantly. It's not going to happen instantly. It's a journey. It's something that's, it's a progress. It's progress, you know, like, or a process anyway. And just know that it's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be convenient. And that's okay. Again, that's the only way for a change to happen. If we are, you know, talking about this in order to actually live out the ideals and the values of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we have to understand that we can't just, you know, bring him out when it's convenient. We can't just talk about it just for one day and then forget about it. You know, like if understand what your part in this whole thing is, whether it's you know, thinking critically about your biases and your narratives, or addressing somebody in your family, or addressing a friend, or whatever. Think about what your part in it is, get comfortable in that, and understand that it's going to take time, but it's worth it. It is really worth it.
Thank you, Lakaya. And last but not least, Mr. Spencer Darden, Jay Spence, please give us your jewel of knowledge, short and sweet, my man. Where you at? Jay?
I'm here. I think the biggest thing is to read, to learn, to understand, and then to do something, right? Because knowledge development in of itself is not a radical action. Knowledge development is what enables radical actions. And so in order to really be a radically inclusive, a just person that can work towards and develop just societies, you have to learn, but then you have to do.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you, brother. And I wanted to make sure I could get Chelsea on here, but I can't because her phone is messed up. But I think that what I can do here is I would like to end with supporting Joan. And Joan, give us your take on this real quick, and then we're going to end this show and talk about ways. I mean, just end the show, and we will have this Zoom meeting on our website. We will provide you guys with all the information about that, and we will also provide you guys with those resources we listed, their email addresses, and ways you can contact them if you would like to have some support on being an ally. Go for it, Joan.
For me, I think today was just really exciting. It's not, I want more. I think we have to have, I think somebody brought it up earlier, we have to have more of these conversations. It has to be more frequent. We have to deal with a variety of questions that are out there. And one thing I would recommend is that aside from maybe reviewing the tape of what we've covered today and reviewing some of the questions, and of course you'll have contact information for all of our panelists and key resources that were introduced to you today. I think it would be wonderful to understand through your survey what more do you want to see, so that we're not here just another year from now having this conversation. What kind of dynamic? I mean, is it a once a month dialogue? Is it a quarterly thing? What additional topics can we cover so that we can continue the conversation, we can continue the journey? And as for me, I learned a lot today. I want to thank everybody who have contributed to the program. I think these case studies helped us kind of get things started. And so our Vistas being willing to get out there and talk about some of these things and us learn the proper way of addressing some of these issues. Again, it's a beginning, and I'm really excited, and thank you all very much.
Thank you. I don't know if I got Jason. Dr. Otley, did I get you, bro? And I think he may have disappeared, but that's okay. So with that being said, hey man, everyone, I hope you guys all got great information out of this. Remember, we have Miss Hooper at the Carew Center. The Carew Center is there for you. And here's the other thing for you guys to remember. Did I say it wrong again? It's Hopper. Dang it. You know what I meant. Danielle, don't be laughing at me. So I also want to let you know, here at the Center for Service and Learning, we house the Social Action Clinic that is ran by Amelia Jones, who is our AmeriCorps member here, who coordinates those social action things. So if you hear something in this, if something passionate came out to you and you're like, man, I could do something about this, I want to create something, please get in touch with us about our social action clinic. And also, if you're trying to figure out what to do, you got that gap year, or you're trying to figure out ways you can decrease poverty, don't forget about the AmeriCorps program that is housed here in the Center for Service and Learning. Please contact Chelsea Franklin. She is the person who coordinates our state and national service. A wonderful person, a wonderful resource. And if you guys don't mind, by using your icons, can we get a clap for our panelists and Miss Jones and Miss Franklin and Carrie Bronner and Joan for doing the thing here? Can we get the claps up? Get the claps up. Get the claps up. That's what I'm talking about. So with that being said, I hope everyone had a wonderful time here today. I hope their heads hurting a little bit from using that front instead of that back. Nobody? And I will end with a dad joke. How do dinosaurs bank? They use Tyrannosaurus checks. Peace. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Have a good one, everybody.